So it's such a pleasure to really be here and in this wonderful house, which together with the great Art Nouveau buildings around the city really demonstrate how Oradea was so much part of these new art international tendencies at the beginning of the 20th century. But I want to take you back to Glasgow and examine how the local variant in Glasgow in Scotland fitted into this same international picture, and then try and tease apart aspects of the very specific cultural context of that city, Glasgow, that really shaped this style and the mindset that underpinned it. So I'm starting with what was the most comprehensive display of these new art tendencies in Glasgow, which is the Scottish section at this huge exhibition in Italy, in Turin, of modern industrial decorative art. And it was the Scottish section and the Hungarian section which were the real, acknowledged internationally as the real showstoppers on this occasion. And you see here the entrance with these vertical banners, a very simple technique of stenciled banners designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, and one of the key installations which he designed with his wife and artistic partner, Margaret MacDonald, and that was the Rose Boudoir. And it very much captured this hallmark of the new art, which was the concept of the interior or the room as a work of art. And you can see in the Rose Boudoir this highly controlled conception which is worked out to the smallest detail, from the wall and floor coverings to the light fittings, the furniture, the upholstery. And the focal point of this very distinctive colour, decoration and texture was this gesso panel designed by Margaret MacDonald, called the Heart of the Rose, with this distinctive abstraction of the human figure, which begins to merge with these floral rose forms, and this heathery purple pinks and muted greens, which critics linked to the colours of the Scottish landscape, which was within very easy reach of the city of Glasgow. And again, these very attenuated proportions and conscious use of relatively cheap materials. The gesso panel is made from string and plaster and glass beads to capture that sense. And these interiors were published in international magazines all over Europe. And indeed, the couple's Glasgow home had already been published in the Studio magazine that Paul mentioned. And they'd made a real show at Vienna at the Secession exhibition in 1900. So this was the mature version of the style. But in the other sections of the Scottish, in the other installations of the Scottish section, you had over 50 other firms and individuals working in a very similar kind of style. So it wasn't just about a lonely single pioneer, but many other contributors, and many of them husband-wife teams, like Herbert and Frances McNair. Frances was Margaret MacDonald's sister, and together with the MacDonalds, they were known as the Four. But there were others like E.A. Taylor and his wife Jessie King, Talwyn Morris, or their friend George Logan, again with this idea of the furniture and panelling symbolically rooted to the floor. They've even woven a lily pond into the carpet of this music room. So it is a true Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. And the fact that it's a music room, it's also appealing to that interpenetration of all these different art forms. And it's a collaborative work. The fireplace by the architect James Salmon was designed not for coal or wood, but for electricity. And this identification of the new art with the new technologies and modern technologies integrated into the home. And what all these practitioners had in common was some connection with the Glasgow School of Art, which gave the phenomenon an institutional focus in the city. And the man who really brought together the Turin exhibition, which was dominated by workers from Glasgow. There was virtually no one from Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland. So it was very much a West Coast phenomenon. And Fra Newbery had, in the face of opposition, managed to secure the design of a brand new building for the art school by his protege, Charles Rennie Mackintosh. The first stage was completed in 1899, so that was already built. And then the library wing was added in 1909. Tragically, this is the building that some of you may know has twice burnt, now burnt to the ground. It's really heartrending because it's such a focal point for the whole city, not just of the Glasgow style, but of artistic life and the community in the city. But I think also Fra Newbery and his wife Jessie Newbery, who established this very innovatory department of embroidery and textiles in the 1890s, they were a role model of this interdependent couple, each with a separate identity but working collaboratively. And indeed, they encouraged their students to be politically involved in the whole campaign for votes for women and women's suffrage. This is a program for the suffrage movement. And it says, the woman's cause is man's. They rise or fall together. So it was very much part of creating new professional, educational opportunities for women, largely middle-class women, it has to be said. But it was also redefining concepts of human beauty and female dress. They were advocates of reform dress as well. And it wasn't just in Turin that all these designers were showing. That same year, in 1902...
Sometimes it goes out, but it comes back.
Yes, right. It was, interestingly, Margaret MacDonald who was chosen for the cover of the magazine Deutsche Kunst und Dekoration to represent the Scottish section in Turin. But Mackintosh was also invited that year to exhibit in Moscow. And there was a really extensive exhibition, again dominated by Glaswegians, at the Ipamüvezető Museum in Budapest of British arts and crafts. And that's the cover designed by the Glasgow artist George Walton. And from that exhibition, the Budapest Museum acquired works for the collection, and they illustrated works by Mackintosh and some of the others in the Mintalapok, which were again distributed to art schools throughout the Kingdom of Hungary. The prompt to those exhibitions had actually come a year earlier at Glasgow's own international exhibition. And to emphasize the scale of these, some 11.5 million people visited this international exhibition. And the architect Feodor Shechtel, the Russian architect who was pioneering the new art in Moscow, he designed an entire Russian village in Glasgow, and they shipped over 180 Russian carpenters to build this village. And it was the director of the Budapest Ipamüvezető Museum who also visited the exhibition and decided to ship this entire pavilion of interiors by the furnishing firm Wiley & Lochhead over to Budapest. I show you one of them here. Now, what that exhibition also did, I think, was show how integrated this whole Glasgow style was with international trade and commerce. The coastal location meant that there was this constant flow of raw materials, people, finished goods centered on Glasgow, where it's true that some half of the ships afloat worldwide in 1900 were actually built on the River Clyde. And indeed, the North British locomotives, which manufactured railways, trains, which were sent all over the world, that was the largest locomotive industry in the world at that time, based in Glasgow. James Templeton, the carpet manufacturers, they had offices in London, Manchester, Melbourne, Montreal. So the Glasgow style was locked into this international context. But I think to understand it, we need to turn back to the city. And if you walk around the city now, you will see everywhere evidence of this moment, not least in these close tiles, entrances to tenement blocks, and the stained glass windows which you see built into the city's fabric. And it was this, the way that the style offered opportunities for designers in so many new institutional buildings, private patronage, as well as design for exports. And the Studio magazine said, nowhere has the modern movement of art been entered upon more seriously than in Glasgow. The church, the school, the house, and that house is the house of the publisher Walter Blackie, who was a major patron of the new style and in the books and graphics that he published. But also the shop, the restaurant or tea rooms for which Glasgow was famed, the poster, the book, all have come under the spell of the new influence. So that gives you some sense of the extent of this of this style. And I think the term Glasgow style, which was used at the time, points to this identification with the city. And there was very much a sense of shared pride in the city's large-scale manipulation of metal, of building these giant ships and railways, and all this manufacturing. And every day you would see locomotives being drawn through the city down to the cranes of the docks on the Clyde for export. So that sense of spectacle was helped people to identify, I think, with this idea of industrial craft. And the Glasgow style is marked by these high finishes, which have an almost metallic feel. Some of the wood appears to be like metal, these rather fluid forms and dark or metallic finishes used on a lot of the furniture. So you're looking at this sense of pride in these products. And I think there's something about the international outlook of many of the Glasgow style designers, combined with that identification with the city. You know, they are living and working, designing in the city, and which appealed to the city's middle-class elite and the industrialists. And the design really oozes this sense of experimentation. It's daring. It's got this sense of dynamic growth, and the attenuated proportions, the sprouting proportions, have that sense of dynamic risk, which was central to this boom-bust economy. And it was also the River Clyde, which runs through the city and its tributaries, connected the shipyards and cranes in the city to this beautiful mountainous landscape outside. Loch Katrine was where the city's water supply was piped from. And you see an artist sketching there in the foreground. It had become really also a tourist attraction. But it's a sense of nature being channeled into the city's industrial culture. They were interdependent, the landscape and industry. And I think that was an issue for the designers. How did you bring industry and nature together? How did you express the synthesis between them? The many type of design skills and objects that I've shown you already, much of this design activity shared an emphasis on drawing skills, whether that's drawing a marine engineered engine for Napier, whether it's the design for a piece of embroidery or a design for a piece of furniture. There's this same linear style and these delicate color washes which point to a shared sensibility. These students were actually studying often side by side, and E.A. Taylor, who designed that furniture, started work as a draftsman in a shipyard. So there was all this interchange between industry and craft and art in the city. And these skills were very much honed in the teaching at the Glasgow School of Art. And rather than referring to historical styles, the great leveller was felt to be a reference to nature and natural forms. And as you entered the main door of the School of Art, you passed under this shallow relief, which was also enacted by students in a pageant, whereby the sister arts symbolically presented their tributes to their dear mother nature, presented as this tree growing between them. And at the top of the art school, you have this bird, this symbol of imaginative freedom topping the school. And the motif was also repeated in the imagery for the Glasgow School of Art club. Students were encouraged to go to nature. There was a conservatory in the school, and the botanic gardens supplied plants for the students to draw, and they went out on sketching expeditions, particularly in the summer when it wasn't raining quite so much, into the countryside. And it was this process of analysing and stripping away and distilling these plant forms until you had this almost abstract form of decoration. And you can see a drawing of flowers in the centre there, which was signed by both Mackintosh and Margaret MacDonald. They were working so closely together, it's very difficult to tease apart their separate contributions. And the art school was offering classes in the evenings and on Saturdays to teachers, and providing a curriculum to be taught in schools. This is educational needlecraft, which talks about how to introduce leaf forms to embroidery and clothing. Again, by distilling the skeletal structure of the leaf form so that you retain this sense of dynamic growth. And I think the other thing that's so interesting is the way that it's this linear drawing, which is a conceptual prompt to develop ideas in the round, in 3 dimensions. So you move from flat ornament to 3-dimensional forms, as you see in the electric light fitting and the shallow relief on the chair back. And it wasn't just plants, it was also the human figure that was subjected to that same analysis and distillation of form. Both Glasgow and Edinburgh had very distinguished medical schools, and the study of anatomy had been part of that since the Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century. And students were encouraged to both draw the human figure from plaster casts and from anatomical specimens. And this was the time, of course, that Röntgen was developing X-ray technology, and the students had folios of these X-ray images to look at. And you can see the connection in the way this emaciated, attenuated, androgynous form on the sconce on the far side is subjecting the human figure to the same processes as these other natural forms. And this was a very new and very challenging type of ornament. This gave rise to the nickname the spook and ghoul school, because it was really pointing to threatened boundaries. This was a new conception of the female body and female beauty, and the human figure. So you're looking at a phenomenon which is not just about celebrating industrial craft culture in the city. It's also pointing to many of the tensions which were ripe for inflammation at this time in the city. Even in the mid-19th century, there was already real disquiet about the dramatic effects of rapid industrialization and the increase of slum areas of the city and contagious diseases and crime and filth. It was really unbridled, unregulated growth, which had a dark side as well as an optimistic, progressive one. So that was one side. And also problematic was the relationship to the countryside. In some ways, the countryside had been, and landscape and folk culture had been more theorized and discussed than any other aspect of the city's culture, not least through the work of the national poet Robert Burns, who, starting with his poetry in the late 18th century, you could say he'd almost invented folk culture in Scotland. And it was that literary tradition of folk culture, developed then in the novels of Walter Scott, which was allied to this kind of spectacular scenery and found its way into the romantic imagination in many European countries. But essentially, it was a depopulated landscape. This was also an era of mass emigration, agricultural depression. It was very difficult to romanticize rural life or rural crafts in the kind of way that Paul referred to. And in many parts of the Highlands, it wasn't just objects that were exported. People were being forcibly removed from the land and either came to the city and were fueling the industrial workforce of Glasgow, or they were emigrating further afield, particularly to Canada, America, or Australia, where there are such large numbers of Scottish migrants. But this so this was a traumatic episode in the nation's history. and not one that designers wanted to really, well, they found it difficult to negotiate. You know, many people still had an emotional connection to extended family in the Scottish countryside, not least Mackintosh. His father is the character in the centre of the Scottish tug-of-war team, this magnificent sporran and kilt, as he appeared in the International Exhibition in Paris in 1889. The last thing Mackintosh and his contemporaries wanted to do was to mobilise this kind of Scottish identity, the Tartanalia, or this imagery of rural life. And many of these displaced people swelling the workforce were actually Catholic and automatically, in that sense, excluded from the dominant Protestant culture of the city. And the Protestant culture also dominated the Masonic brotherhood. And you see that in the necropolis, the figure of John Knox looms over the east end of the city, just above the medieval cathedral. John Knox, a radical Calvinist, severe Calvinist. And on the far side, this is a discovery I made, thanks to Deodat, just today. A membership of the Grand Masonic Lodge of Glasgow, which was named St. Kentigern, the patron saint of Glasgow, whose remains were buried in the medieval cathedral that you see at the top of that document there. So there is a sense that that religious, social, those social distinctions really fed into the Glasgow style. And just a reminder that this was a brotherhood that not only involved people from the shipyards and industry and the architectural and building trades in the city, it was an international brotherhood. And I show you the Masonic temple here in Oradea, designed by Ballantyne Yombo in 1902. And the document which says, "To all masters of the universe, begging all our brothers to recognize and protect him." So you could really call upon this brotherhood, these connections, wherever you were traveling. So it's that sense of masking those tensions and restating boundaries that you see in the interiors of the Mackintosh's home, where you move from the darker dining room on the ground floor to the incredible white light room, the drawing room on the first floor, and then one flight further up to the bedroom. And it's as though you are casting off the dirt and filth and disease, which is all being kept at bay. It's this idea of dirt as defined by the anthropologist Mary Douglas as matter out of place. So indeed, if you were the wrong class or you were wearing the wrong clothes, when you entered this interior, you would feel as matter out of place. So in a sense, that's one way of reading the the Glasgow style, but also this sense of moving towards a higher, more spiritual level of being. So just finally, that was the sense that they were trying to dramatically enact, staff and students of the art school, who performed a pageant of the Masque of the City Arms in 1905, which was referring to these Gallic saints and divinities. It was awakening that Gallic spiritual past, which would connect nature and industry. Clutha was the Gallic divinity of the River Clyde. That's the name given to the glassware designed by George Walton. And Glasgow, that's Gaelic for dear green place. So that's really the sense I'm trying to give you of the Glasgow style, and this language that could as easily refer to science in modern life as to the natural history of plants. These are book covers published by Walter Blackie, the patron of Mackintosh at the Hill House. Thanks.